morning, Dog Nation. Happy Friday. I'm Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, finishing up what's been, I think, a really fun week for us. Kind of a combination, some of me, some special guests. That continues here today. We've also got some fun stuff on tap for you before we get to that, including some bold predictions, perhaps sure to be wrong, but hopefully not. Also, speaking of being wrong, a take that I gave a long time ago as it relates to the future of Georgia football. We're going to take a moment to kind of revisit this to see if maybe it has a chance of coming true. We're going to have a good time here on a Friday. We are so glad that you are with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Monday, we'll be getting back to normal, kind of back in the saddle, doing the show live again. I'll be looking forward to that, finishing off a week here on a strong note, including Kaylee Mansell coming up in a few minutes. She's going to step in for me. I'm obviously pre-recording. Many of you are aware of that. Most of you are. She's going to step in and do a really fun roundtable with some of our DawgNation colleagues here in a little bit. That's going to be really good. Prior to that, though, I want to also have some fun here for a moment, too. It feels like a pretty good time of year to maybe just sort of pause for a moment and maybe start to kind of shape some of your thoughts about the 2025 season. One of the best ways to do that is with some bold predictions. We kind of had some fun the other day at the expense of the guy from 24/7 Sports who made a bold prediction about Georgia losing to Georgia Tech. There'll be none of that during this segment, I promise. And, you know, honestly, I would say that I don't know that I feel as great about my bold predictions this time of year heading into 2025 as maybe I would have felt about some of my bold predictions in the past. I don't know that I do. And I hope you'll understand this about me. I think you probably appreciate this. Look, the easiest thing in the world for me to do, it'd be an easy way to fill 15 minutes. It'd be probably a nice headline, make for a nice thumbnail. If I sat down on this desk today and be like, let me tell you something. These Georgia Bulldogs are going to win the national championship in 2025. They're going to go undefeated, and they're going to do this, and they're going to do that. It'd be a very easy way to just sort of have enough content to do a show and have a headline that would probably get some new folks to watch it who don't typically watch it. This would be an easy thing to do. I hope you appreciate the fact that when it comes to stuff like this, we try not to always take the easiest pathway out there, because if I can't like back it up with some intellectual honesty, then I just don't want to injure my relationship with those of you who are listening or watching on a regular basis. I feel like I owe you my honesty, and that's what we try to do. And so my honest take, overarching before we get into anything else, is my honest take about Georgia for 2025, I'm not quite so sure what we're going to see. I will tell you that my kind of roller coaster ride on this has probably been a little similar to what some of yours has been. I was pretty down after the Sugar Bowl, pretty dejected. Really felt like, I don't know, I mean, like doing that show, it was Kaylee and me in New Orleans, whatever the day was after. It's like, oh, hey, man, I'm in a terrible mood. This is awful. I would say in the couple of days after that, started getting a little more optimistic about the current state of affairs. And for the most part, that optimism has persisted as we get kind of into the calendar year of 2025. But I can't tell you for sure that Georgia's going to, advance farther in the playoff this year than it did last year, that it's certainly going to win the national championship, or even that it will repeat as SEC champions. I think the college ball world is becoming more difficult to predict. I think everyone is losing to somebody eventually. I don't think we live in a sport where undefeated is a realistic expectation anymore. Wasn't true in 2024. We did call that correctly prior to last season. I believe the same thing will probably be true for this year too. So when it comes to bold predictions, at least for now, who knows what we'll have talked ourselves into by the time we get to the summer, but at least for now, there will be no proclamations of championships, no proclamations of anything like that, because while it's certainly a possibility, right now, I don't know that I could sign my name to that prediction and be willing to necessarily stand beside it. I think that Georgia's got a chance to do everything that every Georgia fan wants them to do. I don't know that I necessarily feel certain in saying, and they're going to go out there and do it. I am, like some of you, probably a little bit wait and see, at least for now. However, I do have 3 bold predictions for the upcoming season that I do want to give you. And the truth is if these predictions actually work out, then Georgia's probably in pretty good shape. So maybe we're just taking a slightly different path at the same eventual result. Let me give you the first one. And maybe this is not a surprise based on some of our recent chatter, but it's my bold prediction nonetheless. I believe that Nate Frazier is going to have 1,000 yards for Georgia this season. I believe that Frazier will be a 1,000-yard rusher. And I think this is true for a handful of reasons. Most importantly, reason number 1, I think Frazier's probably a really good player. We have said now several times that when you compare Frazier's first season at Georgia to other players at Georgia that eventually became 1,000-yard rushers, Frazier as a freshman looks a lot like those guys, that the top-end projections for what Nate can be at UGA are very, very favorable. The Sony Michel, DeAndre Swift type category, that's the sort of player that it looks like Frazier's going to kind of comp with here right now. So Frazier himself is very good, at least the potential to be, so therefore that's one of the main reasons. It's also a year in which Georgia's making a transition with the starting quarterback. I think that transition gives them an opportunity to perhaps reinvent themselves a little bit from the running game. And I'm going to place a little bit of a bet here on just like good old-fashioned motivation. And, I mean, this Georgia offensive line, the guys that, were here a year ago coming back, or just the program overall, man, they've had to take a lot of lumps here in the last few weeks, last few months. People really saying, this offensive line's not what it once was, not what it needs to be, really pretty critical of the Georgia offensive line overall. And so that group, I think, would love to kind of come out and prove the critics wrong by moving bodies and opening holes. And if they're fired up to play that way, then Nate Frazier is going to be the benefit of that. And as Georgia maybe takes it a little bit easy with a starting quarterback to begin the season, once again, that creates more opportunities for Frazier, who is a guy that we think is really a really kind of pretty dazzling prospect. So all of that, to me, adds up to what could be 1,000-yard season for Frazier. That's our prediction. If it's true, it'll be the first time for Georgia since 2019. We think that counts as bold. Here's the second bold prediction. Georgia has a pretty distinguished history in recent years of not only winning championships, but they have like a national award winner darn near every year. Jalen Walker won the Butkus Award last year. That's the 3rd Georgia player to win the Butkus. You've got, Jordan Davis has won individual awards. Georgia's had a Thorpe Award winner in its past. And, of course, Georgia had Brock Bowers as a 2-time Mackey Award winner. That's the award for the nation's top tight end. Now, of all the snubs, and, as Georgia fans, we are always on guard for any time that anybody's snubbed around here, not getting the credit they deserve. Of all the snubs that have ever happened, perhaps the greatest snub of all, the greatest level of disrespect ever was when Bowers wasn't even a finalist for the Mackey Award in 2021, his freshman season, despite the fact that he set like a record for touchdowns for Georgia. Had a crazy, insane statistical year, but he wasn't even a finalist for the award. These award folks aren't always watching quite as closely as you'd like for them to. But the point is, in Georgia's long, distinguished history under Kirby Smart of producing national award winners, the Mackey Award's one they've won a couple of times. So my bold prediction, this was a little bit more bold maybe than the Frazier prediction. My bold prediction is I believe that Oscar Delp will win the Mackey Award this year. I think, and we did a whole thing on Delp the other day. I really have Oscar on my mind right now. By the way, for watching on video, how great to see him enjoying that SEC championship trophy, getting a chance to hold that. I'm reminded of we played this clip from David Pollack about where Pollack said he just didn't think that Delp and Carson Beck had a very good connection with each other. They weren't on the same page with each other. And so now the biggest beneficiary of Gunnar Stockton being the Georgia starting quarterback might be Oscar himself. They live together. They have a strong relationship. Delp played great in the second half of the SEC championship when Gunnar Stockton first came in there. That for Georgia, who has a history of winning Mackey Awards, even if it's an all-time great player like Brock Bowers, it's still a history. Georgia knows how to use the tight end position. Todd Hartley going to make sure these tight ends are a part of that offense. I think that Delp could really stand to benefit from this. And I'm going to play a clip that I've played for you before. Oscar seemed to be very clear-eyed at the end of the season about how it was that he was able to kind of grow and develop and play better as the season went along. Inexplicable how, little use he got maybe at the beginning of the season, but by the end of the year, you were seeing Delp sort of play like the guy he needed to be, and I think it tells the story of what can happen in 2025. Let me let you hear Oscar Delp with me. We did this interview with him while we were in New Orleans, and let your mind wander here for some top-end projections for how good it could be for him in 2025.
First of all, it certainly seems like, and maybe your perspective is different, it seems like you've been playing excellent football sort of in the right time here during this stretch run of the year. 2 big catches, of course, in that overtime period against Texas. How have you kind of seen your season progress? And I guess how good does it feel to sort of see you and your tight end position group seemingly really kind of clicking what it looks to me like at the exact right time?
Yeah, I mean, we've always had good guys in that room, and we've always had a really good room, and stuff at the beginning of the year might not have gone the way it seemed for the fans and everyone, or not all the catches we wanted, but we practice hard every day, and you do it at practice, it comes to you in the game. So I think just making one play after another and just building that confidence and trust with your quarterback and coordinator, it's a lot. But I mean, we're out there doing things where people don't really notice just what we do, just because how versatile of a position we play.
Confidence, trust, quarterback, coordinator. That's what Oscar Delp said he was working on in 2024, and we would think with Gunnar Stockton now at quarterback, we presume him to be the starter, the confidence and trust that duo has with each other, Gunnar throwing to Oscar, perhaps far better than it was with Carson Beck for whatever reason, and maybe that means the sky could be the limit for Oscar Delp. This is a scenario in which, hey, it is open for grabs right now about who the top pass catchers in this team are going to be. We think that Georgia has a chance to be much better wide receiver position overall, transfers, incoming freshmen, players who've been here, they all add into that. But for a program that's been led offensively by a tight end before, would not be a huge surprise if Oscar Delp is among the leaders for the Dogs here this season, and maybe even the national award folks pay attention to that too. Here's the final one here for a moment. And this one's not quite as easy to sort of sum up, but I think by the end of this year, KJ Bolden is going to be kind of the main face of this Georgia defense. So call him a first-team All-SEC guy. Let's just say this. KJ Bolden's going to be an All-American. It's almost better to be a first-team All-SEC than an All-American in some respects, but let's just say that KJ Bolden's going to be an All-American safety in 2025. A lot of this goes back. We had a good conversation with Connor on the show about this going back to Tuesday. Our colleague Connor Riley, going to hear more from him here, by the way, in a moment. Bolden is just a guy that you heard all kinds of really interesting praise for prior to his freshman season at Georgia, that Georgia really chased him as a recruit very hard because they thought he was a special player. And then in a way that's not easy to place like UGA, Bolden earned a lot of freshman playing time. Well, obviously in 2025, the next step is to kind of now be more of a household name nationally than he is currently, but sort of matching the way in which he obviously has a ton of local appeal, and everything about Bolden leads me to believe that that's what's going to happen. Now, I think the fortunes of the Georgia defense overall are going to be determined by how much better they are with the front of the defense, defensive line, edge rush, things like that. Stout against the run, more effective with the pass rush. But Georgia seems to have that great safety each and every year. Everything about it seems to make it seem that KJ Bolden is the next in line for that. So I got KJ Bolden as an All-American. I've got Oscar Delp as a Mackey Award winner, best tight end in the country, and I believe that Nate Frazier is going to get 1,000 yards. 3 bold predictions that reflect what I said to begin the show, that at one point in time, maybe in the immediate aftermath of the loss to Notre Dame, not quite sure where things exactly stood for UGA and how close to the nationally elite the Dogs still were. But as time passes, you kind of get a little bit more clarity of thought, and maybe the optimism that we didn't have in the immediate aftermath of the Sugar Bowl loss, now we have a little bit more of that. And you see the potential building blocks of individual players who could have great seasons that collectively add up to a Georgia team that's right back in the mix of where it wants to be. So as we continue to roll through 2025, those discussions are going to be a lot of fun. But for now, Nate Frazier, Oscar Delp, KJ Bolden, That seems like three pretty good players to think about as you start to look ahead towards spring practice and what's next for these Dogs. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Kroger, and we are happy you're with us. It's normally live today, pre-recorded for me for one final time. I'll be back live again on Monday. We're going to give way to some live stuff here in a moment. Kaylee Mansell's got you for a really fun DawgNation roundtable, bringing in some of our DawgNation colleagues, chatting with them a little bit. That coming up with Kaylee in just a bit. Really good stuff there. By the way, speaking of good stuff, our friends at Kroger, great stuff as always. And one of the best ways to get the best from Kroger is with the membership opportunity they call Kroger Boost. You're already buying stuff at Kroger anyway. You're getting fuel points perhaps for what you're buying. But if you're a Kroger Boost member, you get twice the fuel points for every dollar you spend at your local Kroger. Awesome experience there. And take advantage of free grocery delivery, free pickup, just really a lot of convenient options and money-saving stuff too. So become a member, Kroger Boost today. That's online, Kroger.com/boost. That's Kroger.com/boost. You can even try it for free for 30 days. So check out Kroger Boost today for more on that. As I said, Kaylee Mansell in a moment. Really good DawgNation roundtable. That's going to be awesome here in a minute. But prior to that, though, let's go around the doghouse, presented today by our friends at Zagoria Law. So if you want to go back now several years ago, speaking of bold predictions, a bold prediction that I made at the time that up until now has not quite turned out to be true, but still time for it to. I said after the 2021 season that the legacy of that defense was that it might one day create, if I'm being honest, I didn't say might, I said it would create a defense at Georgia that was one day even better than the 2021 defense was. Because when future recruits saw the success those Georgia players had playing with each other, the money they made leaving Georgia go on to the NFL, that when they got a chance to see all of that, they would want some of that for themselves too. And this unprecedented collection of talent, where the Georgia 2021 defense was, would have such a reputation that it would eventually produce a defense that was even better. And to be fair, that has not happened. And the three defenses that Georgia's fielded since then, they've been good, but not matching what Georgia did in 2021. Now, to be fair, as I was saying all of that, Kirby Smart was saying something pretty different at the time. You know, the notion that the championships that Georgia had won because of great defense and the perceived bump you might get in recruiting because of all that extra national attention, all that kind of stuff. Kirby saying, I'm not really quite so sure that we're getting as much of this as some people think that we might. In fact, this is one of many statements he sort of made about that at the time, kind of downplaying some of the coattails that you get because of the great defense and the national championship success that Georgia had in 2021. This was Kirby Smart from back during that era.
I don't know if you can measure that. I think it gets you in the conversation with more national guys, but there's nobody I look at this list and say we wouldn't have gotten had we not won it, or we got them because we won it. I can't quantify that.
Many statements like that during that time where Kirby just said, listen, these guys maybe are not thinking about all that kind of stuff as much as you maybe think that they are, and maybe he's right about that. However, I don't give up easily on opinions, and, you know, thinking back to what I said at the time, oh my gosh, so many people are going to want to play at Georgia because of this 2021 defense. And now, I would say that there are players who have come to Georgia because of the success that Georgia's had in 2021, finding individual comps that made them feel like they had a chance to really thrive here at UGA. So there is some of that, obviously, that's going on. But the full-on ability to kind of match the success of that defense, thus far we haven't quite seen that. But you kind of wonder, on the basis of recent events, is there still a chance that might still eventually become true? Kirby would say, and did say, the national championship bump in recruiting, probably a little overstated, maybe a little overrated, especially in an NIL era. That's just not quite the thing that maybe players think about as much as you think. But what about what we saw a couple of weeks ago when not only the Georgia players that had led Georgia to that 2021 national championship, when they're also playing together and helping lead the Philadelphia Eagles to a Super Bowl championship? Does that perhaps give, years later, a little bit of a recruiting bump for Georgia that maybe Kirby said they didn't fully get in the immediate aftermath of 2021. In fact, there's a photo that, for whatever reason, has just been seen so much. The Philly Dogs account, I guess, the first one to put this out there, of just the awe-inspiring picture of Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter and Nolan Smith kind of lined up as a three-man front in that Super Bowl together, all three teammates, at least in the 2021 National Championship defense together too, perhaps many images of them doing something similar while playing for Georgia. So years ago, Kirby would have said, nah, don't get a huge national championship bump. Guys aren't really thinking about that. But now it's not just a national championship bump. Now it's also a national championship and Super Bowl bump. You kind of wonder, and maybe eventually we'll hear more about this, about whether or not there are even more recruiting reverberations to be felt because of the fact those same guys that had success together at Georgia have now all had that same success together in the NFL. Interesting to consider. And that is Around the Doghouse, presented today by our friends at Zagoria Law. Now, Zagoria Law, a very interesting legal firm because they've really chosen to specialize in a very narrow focus when it comes to personal injury law. And this is one of those things, if you watch the news, you see this type of thing out there all the time. Dog bites, injuries caused by dogs. You know, let's say you're walking in the park, child, especially elderly person, something like that. A dog that's not properly cared for, negligent situation on the part of the owner, that can create an injury for you. And if that's happened to you, you want your compensation just like any other personal injury situation. Well, that's where our friends at Zagoria Law can step up and do good work for you because they literally wrote the book on how to win these types of cases. They're the official dog bite injury lawyers of the Georgia Bulldogs. So you can give them a call. 833-GA-DOG-BITE. That's dog spelled D-O-G. That's conventionally. 833-GA-DOG-BITE. You can also find them online, ZagoriaLaw.com, Z-A-G-O-R-I-A, ZagoriaLaw.com. If you've been bitten by a dog that wasn't yours, somebody you love has been injured by a dog, wasn't properly cared for by its owner, get the compensation you deserve. Fight for that compensation, pain, suffering, legal, medical bills, whatever else. Our friends at Zagoria Law want to help you. One more time, 833-GA-DOG-BITE or online, ZagoriaLaw.com. All right, so closing out the week on a very strong note here. Me, the pre-recorded version myself, giving way to a live version of Kaylee Mansell. Great DawgNation Roundtable. Obviously, in the week that I've been gone, there's no telling what has happened. So to catch up on all the in-the-moment news, Kaylee's got you the rest of the way on that. And, of course, as always, thank you for being with us on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.
Good morning, Dog Nation, and welcome into DawgNation Daily. I'm Kaylee Mansell with some special guests here in the studio today for a roundtable. We've got Jeff Sentell right here, Connor Riley. I have the privilege of hosting shows with both of them, so it's cool to have you both here in the studio with me. We just got the chance to listen to Brandon give his bold predictions for this season, with Nate Frazier being a 1,000-yard rusher, KJ Bolden receiving some accolades, and Oscar Delp being a Mackey finalist. Connor, what's your reaction to hearing Brandon's bold predictions?
Oscar Delp being a Mackey finalist is certainly a bold prediction because, I'm very high on Oscar Delp, what he's going to mean to this team, what he can bring as a leader. But I also think there's a very real world where, once again, he's not Georgia's most statistically productive tight end. That could very well be Lawson Lucky. It was the case in the 2024 season. Lucky's a very dynamic receiver, and talking to Todd Hartley prior to the Sugar Bowl, he still doesn't think that Lawson Lucky is all the way back to the player that he was before he suffered that ankle injury during his freshman season. And so I actually think maybe the bolder prediction that BA could have made would have been that Lawson Lucky, the younger, maybe less heralded tight end option on Georgia's tight end room, would have been the Mackey Award finalist.
So, Jeff, here's the thing about a bold prediction. For it to be bold, at least one person has to disagree with what you're saying.
Yeah, so Brandon's going to go 2 for 2 here. Because, I think we've seen the best of Oscar Delp. I think Oscar will probably be a guy that's a captain most weeks. I mean, you see him every time coming out of the tunnel every week, and he's right behind Kirby Smart. He's like Kirby's bouncer coming into keeping guys out of the club or something like that. So he's a figurehead. He's very much a benchmark for Georgia's team. But I don't know, and I think Connor basically said it pretty well, is I would probably have 2 guys in mind that I would say might be Georgia's most, I guess, explosive tight end. before I would think of Oscar Delp. Like Oscar Delp, great attached tight end, means so much to the team, but the guy that's going to put up those MAC stats, I don't think that's Oscar.
So here's the thing. We all have to go out on our own limb today, give our own bold predictions. We can criticize Brandon's, but I'm sure we're going to have some things to say about each other's. We each have 2. We're going to go ahead and let Jeff kick it off. What's your first bold prediction for the 2025 season?
First of all, I got to give a tip of the hat to Brandon for the master of misdirection. He loaded his second prediction so filled with TNT and dynamite that we just all accepted Nate Frazier. We're just like, all right. We're just giving him Nate Frazier. Mine's kind of spicy, and I guess you guys will determine how spicy it is. I think Noah Thomas will be the best player on Georgia's football team next year.
Wow.
I think he will revitalize, supersize the room. I think he will have those big catches. I will think he will have probably 15 to 20% better a year than like a Lawrence Cager type year. And I think that's what Georgia needs. I think that meshes really well with Gunnar Stockton's skill set in terms of Gunner's going to throw it up. He's going to say Noah Thomas is down there somewhere. We're going to get used to saying that, Dog fans. I think Noah is going to have a really big impact on this year's team.
Okay, but how good? Does he have 1,000 receiving yards? Because Georgia didn't have that last year. Is Noah Thomas the one that can do it this year?
I think Georgia's going to get really crazy without giving. These are kind of bonus predictions that aren't even part of it. Yeah. I think it's going to be Georgia's touchdown leader, receiving leader, and catch leader will be 3 different guys.
Okay.
I think it's going to be an amazing wide receiver room this year.
All right, Connor, I see a smirk on your face. What do you have to say?
Because I have essentially a similar prediction. Georgia's statistical leaders this year in terms of wide receiver production weren't on the team last year. Now, Jeff was maybe a little bit more narrow-minded in singling out Noah Thomas there. I think Zachariah Branch could make an impact for Georgia this year. I think Talon Taylor is someone who Jeff has spoken about very well as well. Just how polished he already is coming into Georgia, I think that opens some doors for him to at least make an impact in both the short and intermediate games here. Could maybe even technically throw Colby Young in there, given he was obviously suspended for the team for much of the 2024 season. But with what Georgia's added at the wide receiver room this year, Noah Thomas from Texas A&M, Zachariah Branch from USC, Talon Taylor, C.J. Wiley out of the recruiting class in 2025, I think that Georgia has gone and made this wide receiver room so much more talented than it was a season ago. It was a major complaint at the end of the 2024 season. And Kirby Smart, I think, has gone to great lengths to make sure that that is not going to be the case in 2025.
So what I'm gathering from both of y'all's opinions is that the best receiver on Georgia's team this year will be somebody who wasn't on it last year. There's no possibility that somebody like Dylan Bell can step up into that role that we potentially thought he was going to have last year.
I think we've seen, Kaylee, I said this earlier with Oscar Delp, I think we've seen mostly the best football out of a lot of the players we've seen so far. Like Dylan Bell could be a factor back at running back next year. He could move all the way around. He could be that utility like Deebo Samuel guy that maybe everybody's always thought he has those flashes to his game, because remember, that's what he was as a high school recruit. He made plays out of the backfield. He made plays on short passes, wheel routes, things like that. And I will throw in one caveat. I didn't want to interrupt my good friend Connor, but I think the early reports about Noah Thomas I've heard in Athens, they're so pretty doggone good that makes me throw a little chest behind the prediction and say I think Noah Thomas will be the most impactful Bulldog in 2025.
So, like you, I'm going to go an offensive bold prediction for my first one. Kind of an extension of what Brandon said, but more about the position group. I think for the first time since 2018, Georgia will finish top 2 in the SEC for rushing offense. Dylan Sampson leaves Tennessee. Rocket Sanders leaves South Carolina. They're going to have to learn from their mistakes last year. And with a new quarterback like Gunnar Stockton, who maybe doesn't have that same strength as Carson Beck, they're going to have to rely on the run game a lot more. Nate Frazier's going to put up bigger numbers. One of the Robinsons has to work out. I'm not sure which one it's going to be, but Georgia's going to have to lean a lot more on their run game this year and do it efficiently, go back to the way. So I think that Georgia finishes top 2 in rushing offense for the SEC this year.
I'm interested in seeing what this rush offense looks like. You say that Branson Robinson and Roderick Robinson, one of them has to work out, and neither of them have ever really been all that healthy in their time at the University of Georgia, and you just sort of wonder, is that who they are at this point? My other bold prediction does fall in the running back bucket. It was originally going to be Nate Frazier going to rush for 1,000 yards, but we let Brandon naturally take that. Jeff talked about him a little bit. I think Dillon Bell has more rushing touchdowns this year than he does receiving touchdowns.
Wow.
And I think that speaks to the need at the running back position. We'll see if Georgia goes out and adds anyone via the transfer portal in that spring window, but it's so narrow in terms of the player that they're looking for to fill a certain role, because I think Nate Frazier is going to be their lead running back. They've gotten a lot of nice complementary pieces around him. I think that Dillon Bell is a guy, red zone area, that's where you're going to see him do maybe some of his best work. Deebo Samuel is obviously someone he's long been compared to. He has welcomed those comparisons. Dillon Bell's never going to be a stretch the field guy. I don't think he's going to be a guy that finishes with 1,000 yards in a season. But I think he's a guy, because of his size, because of his speed, because of his strength, can win in those short areas of the field. And I think that's going to show up in the red zone. And Georgia's going to be willing to lean on him as a running back in that factor, as well as maybe trying to limit how many carries Nate Frazier is going to have. Because if that's the case, they're not throwing the ball a whole lot if they're going to be a top 2 rushing offense in 2025.
Wait, so just to clarify, you're saying that Dillon Bell will finish with more rushing touchdowns than receiving touchdowns?
Correct.
Okay, now where I question this, though, is last year a lot of the times when we got in the red zone, especially in third down, we saw them give the ball to Cash Jones. Cash Jones comes back. Now, with them bringing in everyone from the transfer portal wide receiver-wise, I don't see them giving the ball to Dillon Bell as much in the end zone. So I don't mind this, but I feel like this might be a pretty bold one.
Here's one thing that bothers me, Kaylee, and it's like kind of knowing these players the way I do. I don't want to say squeamish is the right word, but trepidation might be the better word. There were so many times last year where I looked at Georgia's backfield and knowing the history of the position. Connor, you'll understand this. This is like there were no dudes back there, or there was only one dude back there. Like when Nate Frazier was hobbled, or maybe he was going through that funk with fumbles or whatever, you looked at that position and ETN may not be available, but ETN himself, as good as he was never a elite high school running back. You know, Branson Robinson's the highest rated guy there. He was a former number 1, number 4 in the country type back. But when you look at the running back position, that's what worries me a little bit about Georgia, is you don't have, outside of Nate Frazier, a guy that will really scare defenses. And that's something that I think the running game will flourish because Georgia will have a lot more weapons at tight end and a lot more weapons at receiver. But at the same time, it just doesn't feel right. I don't know how you guys feel, but it doesn't feel right to not see a Georgia backfield without at least 2 or 3 future NFL guys in there.
I think that this spring practice will tell us more about who's kind of in that number 2 role, especially when it comes to the health of both of the Robinsons anyway.
Yeah, and so, you know, what I'll talk about first-round picks or NFL picks. I don't know. This is kind of another subplot. I don't know if Georgia next year has a clear 2026 NFL draft first rounder. But here's what I do know. They will have a first rounder in Chris Cole. That's what I'm trying to say. The person that you're going to look on the defense and say, oh my, that's a future first round draft pick. Dog fans will like that they'll get 2 more seasons of him. I think Chris Cole will make a lot of Jalen Walker-ish splashes in 2025. And technically he'll just be a sophomore. He'll have 2 seasons. But I think it's going to be a cold world for the Georgia defense in 2025.
Well, I was going to give it back to you, but since you just brought up that point, I'll go ahead and give my next bold prediction. And I heard y'all say that yesterday, that Georgia might not have anybody that goes in the first round. My second bold predictions, I have at least 2 Georgia players going in the first round in 2026. One of them being Monroe Freeling. He's going to be one of the top-rated offensive tackles in that group. I think he makes a lot of improvements from this last season, finds his way in there. And then I really started thinking about Jalen Walker, because when we were talking about him at this point last year, he wasn't a first-round pick, and he was able to jump and make those moves to potentially get in the top 15, even maybe the top 10. So I think that C.J. Allen or Raylan Wilson could potentially have, not as well as Jalen Walker did, but just enough to slide in, and that way Georgia has 2 that go in the first round.
I'll push back there on both fronts. Monroe Freeling's got to get a lot better, and I know he was hurt at the end of this past season. He obviously had shoulder surgery, but even in that, he only started, I believe, 5 games to end last season. So let's say that he does declare after next year. He's only going to have 20 starts, and while that wasn't an issue for Broderick Jones or Amarius Mims, Monroe Freeling is not the same caliber of athlete, in my opinion, that those 2 guys were, and their athletic upside was a big selling point into what got them there. Not to mention, in my opinion, I think through their first 2 years at college, Broderick Jones and Amarius Mims had shown much greater potential and had done a lot more than Monroe Freeling had. Now, Freeling was dealing with injuries this year. That can certainly play a part in it as well. I think Monroe Freeling is someone who he's got to get a lot better if this Georgia team is going to reach its ceiling in 2025. And the fact that he's going to be limited or potentially out for all of spring, I think makes what he continues to do on the offensive side of the ball this offseason all the more important.
So you're someone that got to cover Monroe Freeling when he was in high school, the former 5-star. Does he have enough raw talent and enough work ethic to be able to make that jump?
Yeah, that's tough because, I mean, you don't know immediately. You don't know if Monroe will be the left or the right. And I think sometimes very flexible, very strong. I mean, he was a former basketball player throwing down dunks in high school, which you don't see. Maybe even Monroe's athleticism might be kind of close to Mims because Mims is just 6 feet 9 inches, and Mims really never became that left tackle type guy at Georgia. He was always the right tackle, power tackle. Maybe the stock I have in my prediction earlier about Noah Thomas, maybe he's the first rounder because if Noah Thomas puts together, 40 catches, 12 touchdowns, 600, 900 yards, something like that. I think that frame and that game he's shown in the SEC might garner some NFL draft, early mock draft buzz. But, Kaylee and guys, it's just so tough because that's why the offensive tackle position is so important in the 2026 class, is because you look at the great Georgia teams that could run it all, that could protect Stetson, that won all those big games. They had first rounders. They had first rounders at left tackle or right tackle. And you don't have those first round type guys. I mean, it could get really interesting with probably one of the guys that I think are the more under the radar but more integral parts of the Georgia team. That's EG3, Ernest Green III. Guys, most people don't know how much this guy loves Georgia. Like, I'm convinced that a guy like Ernest Green, who had already started so much his freshman year, has turned down major overtures to go to another program, to go somewhere else. But I feel like I don't know whether it's an obligation, but there's just a true love for Georgia that, hey, I can't leave this offensive line room the way it is right now. And Ernest, we got to remember, he was a great offensive tackle for Georgia in the 2023 season. And if he gets back to that form, then you wonder, is he the left? Did you bump him into the guard spot? Or, eventually I think Georgia's run game is going to be under so much pressure to perform this year. Like you said about the run game needs to show a lot more chops. Is they're going to find their best 5 and roll with their best 5 out there. And maybe that might mean Monroe Freeling at a left, or maybe it might mean Monroe Freeling at a right tackle, something like that.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we talked about on last week's episode of Dog Nation at Large, is you got to find your best 5 early on. All right, we got to keep moving. Give us your second bold prediction.
I gave it earlier. Dylan Bell's going to have more rushing touchdowns than receiving
And what was your first one?
First one was that Georgia's leading receiver was not on the team last year.
All right, there we go. Jeff, close us out.
2 bold ones. I like those. I think one of those things that the flavor of our prediction so far, it sounds like Georgia's going to have a different type team. Like, my bold ones was I think Noah Thomas is going to be, like, buy all your Noah Thomas stock right there, because early indications in Athens is he's going to be that dude, especially big play guy. And then my second one is I think Chris Cole's just going to walk on water this year for Georgia's defense. I think he's going to look like that first rounder that Georgia always has on defense.
All right, and with that, we will wrap up on our bold predictions, and now it's time to go cruising around the SEC.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, it was cold out there today. I told Jeff I couldn't even make it from my car to work, which gets you all the more thinking about the Dog Nation cruise. We've already started making our plans for it. It's growing closer and closer and closer in Dog Nation. We are so excited to see you on Utopia of the Seas this year. But even if you don't have the opportunity to go on the Dog Nation cruise, you can go ahead and start planning your own Royal Caribbean cruise with our very own amazing talent agent, Jessica Slater, as we get closer and closer to spring break or summertime and you just want that vacation with your family. It's a really good place to start, and you can do that by calling her at 770-718-9147 or emailing her at jslater@dreamvacations.com. So we are going to do an SEC Through type segment, and Brandon spent the majority of this week talking about the biggest questions for all other teams in the SEC, and Georgia is still one of the top projected teams to make it to the SEC championship. But it got me thinking about who are those 2 teams that made enough moves in the offseason, maybe strengthened their team through recruiting classes, or just are kind of in the right place at the right time? Who are those 2 teams that can compete with Georgia for an SEC championship this year? Connor, we'll start with you.
I'm going to go off the board here. I think everyone expects Texas to be up there, be a team. You know, obviously, look, we got to mention Arch Manning. They lose a lot on their offensive line. They lose a lot at their skill player positions. They couldn't really run the ball all that well this past season, which is why they ended up losing to Georgia twice. But I'm going to take LSU. I think that this is a team. They bring back Garrett Nussmeier. He's a quarterback I like a lot. They went all in on the portal this year to address some of the defensive concerns that they've had in recent years. They've recruited well. They're going to get Harold Perkins, a very talented defender, back this year as well. I like what this LSU team is building. Their schedule, they got to go to Alabama, but this isn't the same vintage Alabama that it was under Nick Saban. They get A&M at home. They get South Carolina at home, which is a team that I think could contend there as well. So I think Texas is the most obvious one, and they also, once again, it's a more difficult schedule this year because they have to go to Florida and they have to go to Athens. But it's still, I think, a relatively easy schedule compared to the rest of the SEC. And Brian Kelly's LSU team, I think, is someone that absolutely this year can contend. Now, they got to replace Will Campbell. They got to replace some key pieces. But I like what they've done and how they've gone about addressing some concerns this offseason.
I am also going to take LSU. I think that Garrett Nussmeier was 1 season away from having that true breakout star season. I think it comes with this. Get all the interceptions out of the way last year. You mentioned they bring in the top-rated portal class. They also bring in wide receiver talent to help out Garrett Nussmeier. Nick Anderson from Oklahoma, Barian Brown from Kentucky. Also bring in another tight end from Oklahoma. So they're surrounding Nussmeier with the targets that he needs, but at the same time, they knew that the problem that immediately needed to be fixed was the defense. You bring in 2 new edges. You go all in on the portal class. This might be LSU's time to shine.
Very interesting. This is a tempting one because I just like the way South Carolina finished last year, and I think they'll have probably 2 of the probably the preseason offensive player of the year, preseason defensive player of the year in the SEC. But there's something about South Carolina that just makes me think that they're perennially going to be stuck in that 9-3 zone, kind of like friend zoned in terms of championships. I can't. I mean, like, you see what Ryan Williams did in his first year, and I think Alabama's going to get their quarterback a little bit better. They're going to end up, I think, rolling with a 5-star freshman, Keelan Russell, eventually. He was pretty dynamic, arguably the best quarterback on the scene last year. So I think a lot of teams have made moves. If you could tell me that DJ Lagway would be healthy for Florida all season next year, I would think the Gators are definitely threatening, even though they don't really ever try to measure up front like a lot of the way the SEC teams are built. But I kind of looked through all the recruiting classes for this exercises, and like, I think outside of Georgia's best 6 or 7 freshmen, I think Alabama's freshmen look like the next best 6 or 7 that are coming in. And then it's always Alabama. They got plenty of players anyway. Ryan Williams, I was talking to you off air. Like, some of the stuff that came out about Ryan Williams and his practice habits you've seen on social media, his GPS number, how he was the freshman who was 17 years old, but he was the hardest volume worker in practice every day for Alabama. I like it when players that talented are also that type of workers, and that success was not a mirage. Might even get better quarterback play all around from Russell eventually in his sophomore year as well.
Yeah, I think that's my biggest question when it comes to Alabama. We obviously know what Ryan Williams is capable of, but I'm not sure I can put them up there in that category yet just because I don't know what that quarterback situation looks like enough.
Alabama comes to Georgia on September 27th, Jeff. Who is their starting quarterback for that game?
Might be Russell, I would think, because he's really good. Because I think this is going to be a painstaking year for Georgia fans to look at the other best teams in the SEC. They'll see Lenore Sellers at South Carolina. They'll see DJ Lagway at Florida. They'll see a lot of those dual threats across the country. Even you can call Diego Pablo at Vanderbilt as well. And Georgia fans will be like, they'll keep winning games. They'll keep squeaking them out. But they're like, why can't we have that? They want that. I think that's like my good friend Brandon always looking at everybody else's 5-star receiver and thinking that's what Georgia needed to win championships. I think some of that will be, oh, great, Alabama's got another great quarterback that's locked in for the next 3 years, and Georgia fans will be just like, come on, man. That might be the biggest come on, man.
All right, Connor, we'll go back to you. What's your second team?
I think Jeff and I are in agreement on South Carolina in terms of what they can potentially do, but also what their ceiling is as well. I'll use this to take Texas. I think that this is a team that has, again, they've made the college football playoff in each of the last 2 years. They're the only program that can say that. And look, a lot's going to be on the plate of Arch Manning. I absolutely right now 100% believe that he is being overhyped. When you start seeing 2026 NFL mock drafts come out at the end of April, you're going to see Arch Manning up there, and there's no justification for that other than the fact that his last name is Manning. I think you saw, even in that Georgia game when they played in Austin this year, there's still levels that Arch Manning so clearly has to grow and improve, and that just comes with game reps. And so, yes, Texas, I think, once again, benefits from an easy schedule. I think that's going to help them. But the talent level for this team is very good. Steve Sarkisian has done, I think, a good job of identifying what the needs are for this team. They lose a good bit of key players in their secondary, Jahdae Barron and Andrew Makuba. Makuba was one of my favorite players to watch last year. He's not going to be easy to replace. But I think Texas has the sauce right now to figure things out and at least find a way to contend for the SEC, if not outright win it this year.
That's where I stand on things, too. It's the fact that the easy schedule, they're not going to play a Georgia-like schedule. Every single game is a grind, and I think that's going to prohibit injuries from happening, so they're going to be able to get to that final stretch a little bit easier than most teams. I'm going to be watching what they do with the spring portal window because they only bring in 5 players from the transfer portal, and they're basically having to rebuild their offensive line and, as you mentioned, recover some of those guys that they lost in the secondary. I think the schedule makes it easy for them to get to the destination because the journey will be easy to get there.
So I'm gonna, in true spirit of the blind draw, I'm going to take 2 teams that we haven't mentioned. Because obviously, Connor, the LSU picks were good. Connor's Texas pick was good. I've got 2 teams that I'm looking at, and I think one of them will spark up a little bit. First of all, my first one's Tennessee. I look what Tennessee did. I think they got a future first-round offensive tackle in David Sanders Jr. in non-NIL years. I think that would be Georgia's 5-star offensive tackle of the future, starting left tackle of the future. I think they've also got a lot of pieces. I like Travis Smith. They got Christian Gass. I think, we're not going to say that, Nico is going to crack through 2 ceilings and look like an all-SEC player. I'm a big believer, if you've heard me a lot this morning, is let's not try to break limbs. Usually you are what you are. If you've had 2 seasons of SEC football, that's what you are. I like the fact that Tennessee really got 3 or 4 really impact freshmen. I think Travis Smith Jr. Ended up one of their higher-rated guys. That was the guy that Georgia went after. And they also got Christian Gass. I like the fact now when you look at SEC teams, if you have 2 guys that can play quarterback, I feel better about your situations. Georgia fans should feel better about the Puglisi-Stockton situation because I think both of those are capable of getting the Dogs to 10 wins. But the other one for me is Auburn. Now, there's 2 ways this can go. It can be an absolute dumpster fire, because only Ole Miss has more new players this year than Auburn. Auburn took 42 players, combined recruiting class and transfer portal. That's a lot because I don't know if Hugh Freeze, we can say a lot of things about Hugh Freeze, but I don't think he's a master at chemistry and bringing together that much gelling on a roster that quickly. But I do see Auburn has a future first-round receiver. They now have 2 quarterbacks light years better than anybody they've had in the last 2 years, and former 5-star Jackson Arnold and Deuce Knight that was well compensated to come to Auburn as well. So I really think Auburn is going to take a step forward, but not 2 steps forward. That would be the bright side way of looking at it. But the other way to look at it is that's just too many pieces to turn things around. I think one of those 2 I feel good about. Their team kind of making a move to challenge Georgia a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, the bar can't go much lower, so there is really only one direction for Auburn to go, and that is up. I think the success of Hugh Freeze depends on the success of what Jackson Arnold has been able to accomplish, because that was his biggest complaint last year, was that he didn't have a quarterback who could do the things that he was asking and telling everybody to be patient and wait for the next year. Are you nervous at all about Georgia traveling to Auburn?
Yeah, because those games are always hard. Like Connor can remember, you can almost write your game story after Georgia only wins by 8 points on the road against an SEC team. Kirby's going to have that quote loaded up, maybe first deck, second deck, and then six disc CD changer for those of them that might remember that. He's going to say how hard it is to win in the SEC on the road, and I think absolutely it is. And it gets even harder when you really have a first-year quarterback coming in there as well. I mean, we kind of can still call Gunnar Stockton a first-year quarterback simply because he's only started in like 0 SEC games in his career.
We're going to just send you to the press conferences next year with like an easy button that just says it's hard to play on the road in the SEC.
I think it helps Georgia, to Jeff's point, that they're getting Tennessee early, because I think that's a team that can get better over the course of the season, whereas early on, what's the running game going to look like? They have a lot of questions on the offensive line. They also have to replace a lot of the receivers who, quite frankly, weren't all that good last season, and that's a big reason why I think that Tennessee offense really struggled. As far as Auburn, they're the Philadelphia 76ers of the SEC, and I mean that in the most derogatory way possible. This team has had chemistry issues for years, and it's not just Hugh Freeze. It is everything and every part of that organization there. And they have cut corners. The Brian Harsin thing was a disaster. They cut the knees out from Gus Malzahn his last year there. And you can bring in as much talent as you want. You know, Cam Coleman and Deuce Knight and Jackson Arnold, those can be your Joel Embiids. But when your culture is what it is at Auburn, when you're taking days off and you're not going hard all the time like you see other big-time SEC programs, I'm sorry, I just don't believe that that's going to show up and translate when you get in those big-time SEC games. And this is a team, Auburn, last year that lost at home to Vanderbilt, to Arkansas, to Cal. They blew that Oklahoma game. Those are the types of losses where Hugh Freeze, now in his third year, you know, the talent is there, as I think Jeff has pointed out. But it's some of the institutional stuff, some of the cultural stuff at Auburn that just gives me major pause that you're going to be able to flip a switch like they're trying to do and undo all that has been done to this program over really now the last 5 seasons.
I wonder what happens if they don't have the success that Hugh Freeze has promised them all last year. I mean, do they cut it? Do they cut him at that point?
They got to make it work with Hugh Freeze. They went out there to hire him when I don't think there was another SEC school that was going to do so. And they really stuck their neck out there in a way they didn't necessarily have to. But you follow up the end of the Gus Malzahn era with the Brian Harsin era, which was a debacle both at the beginning when they were trying to hire him, and then obviously the way it plays out on the field. And then you bring in Hugh Freeze. Much like I think Mario Cristobal at Miami, Auburn has to make it work with Hugh Freeze, and they're going to have to be patient here. And that's something that hasn't always jived with the way that Auburn does things.
Absolutely has to have very good quarterback play. That's the thing. I agree with everything Connor's saying, but I think sooner or later, you know, Hugh Freeze is the guy. The culture is the big thing, but he throws his team under the bus in post-game press conferences. Those are things that we would never kind of hear a Kirby Smart or a Nick Saban type coach do. Even Billy Napier is not even the type of coach to do that out of the Saban coaching tree. But if you like, listen, he had some pedestrian quarterbacks at Ole Miss, and he kind of made it work. And it's funny now, some of the social media comments from his pedestrian quarterbacks are saying that guy's a jerk, even though we won a lot. I think that's indicative of kind of like the coaching DNA at Auburn. But if, look, Jackson Arnold and Deuce Knight, those are going to be dynamic players that can kind of make a wrong play right for Auburn in a lot of cases. I think the big thing is I think Auburn will get to the point where probably it can beat anybody, like a Texas, an LSU, a Georgia. But like Connor said, the very next week they might lose to Vanderbilt, they might lose to Ole Miss, they might lose to Oklahoma again.
At this point, the way I see it is that the SEC is a lot closer in terms of talent this year than it was last year. I don't think that there is 2 or 3 teams that are just way above everyone else. I feel like it's grown a little bit closer, and the gap is slowly getting tighter.
Well, the problem you have with the SEC is there are 8-9 teams that believe it's their birthright to win a national championship. And like you can even look at the Big Ten. There's maybe 4 or 5 of those teams in there. ACC, Clemson and Miami and Florida State. Big 12, no one, I don't think, really aspires to win a national championship every year. And so when you have that glut of teams that are competing to try and win like that, I think it sort of just pulls everyone towards the middle, and that's why I think you saw the SEC have the season that it had last year. The spreading out of talent and the way it has gone about in this league, I think hurts the top end of it.
It's just funny how, Connor, covering the league as long as you do, when there's a lot of quarterbacks returning, everybody thinks, oh my gosh, the SEC's loaded. And then when there's new turnover at quarterbacks, everybody thinks, oh, it's wide open, anybody can win this. And it's so funny how it's kind of never been a quarterback-driven league. It's always been running backs, defenses, things like that win the championship. But it's a new face at Georgia. It's a new face at Alabama. It's a new face at Texas. It's a new face in a lot of places. And that's what leads people to think that the conference is kind of anybody's for the taking. I would say if we were any other program in the SEC doing a panel discussion like this, Florida, LSU, I don't even, Mississippi State has a pulse enough to be doing this type of stuff in February. But like if they were, I'm sure everybody would still they've got to look at Georgia, look at what Georgia's done, look at all the stacks of top talent. And I believe Georgia is at the point where it's in everybody's top 2 in this discussion. Alabama fans, Texas fans, they all realize. I mean, Texas still haven't beaten Georgia.
Yeah, I mean, go look at any other site from any other SEC school. It's Texas and Georgia right there at the top. All right, so in just a minute, we are going to do our long finish, but first, we want to give a shout out to Daytona Beach. Start thinking about your vacations for the next couple of months. Now is a great time to start thinking about Daytona Beach. 23 miles of Atlantic shoreline. So much more than just laying out on the beach. You can fish, kayak, hike, and more. Easy access if you're in the state of Georgia. You can just get in the car and drive. Or if you're a little bit further away, easy access with direct flights to Daytona Beach International Airport. Now it's a great chance to score amazing deals on coastal accommodations, and you can do that by visiting DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals. That's DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals. All right, and now we are going to go ahead and do our long finish, and it's also going to include our very own Cody Chathens as well. The topic at hand is our Mount Rushmore of DGDs, except for we're all going to provide one. Cody's also, so we're going to, by the end of it, we'll each have our 4 up on the board. I'm actually going to go first because I'm going to make this easy. I don't think any of y'all are going to take Nick Chubb. I am going to use the Northwest Georgia bias. I will bring back the him coming back along with Sony.
Makes it hard.
Yeah, so I'm going Nick number 1 because I think everybody knew that's where I was going to go.
When you say Mount Rushmore of DG, like, is it the 4 best players to ever play for the university? Is it
like, you know how we classify people as DGDs, not necessarily the most talented, but their contribution to the university as a whole? Like, I think like the Jordan Davis type guys who really captivated what you want the character of a Georgia football player to be. Because we talked about it this year. We didn't really think there was one out of this group, except maybe a guy like Dan Jackson.
You thought that no one was going to pick Nick Chubb.
Well, I just figured y'all assumed that I was going to take Nick Chubb, so that's why I went first.
Okay. She sets the rules.
So in a good
And I had myself going first in the rundown.
Ladies first.
I have Connor going second.
We're
so
Southern gentlemen here.
there you go.
So in order to make sure I understand the question correctly and for everybody following along, you could make the case that Hot Rod Rodrigo Blankenship would be a DGD just because he was beloved by all.
Yeah.
And contributed to big wins, but not exactly the Hall of Fame, college football Hall of Famer, best ever Georgia Bulldog football player.
So where this conversation kind of stems from, because it's been something I've been sitting on for a while, I thought about using it for at-large, and I don't want to give Carson Beck any more airtime on the show, but when he transferred, the conversation came up of, is he a DGD or is he not? And a lot of people said no, so we're doing our very own Mount Rushmore of those that are undeniable.
So is Jalen Walker not a DGD then?
That's up to you. You can put him on that board, because you get a pick.
Well, but there's a difference between saying someone's a DGD and then putting him on the Mount Rushmore of DGDs.
Well, it's your credibility on the line.
Ooh. That's that good at-large stuff I'm here for. Do I need some popcorn here to just be sitting there just going?
Jeff and I are just asking for the definition of what a DGD is and how they can get on the Mount Rushmore.
I felt like I've given pretty good clarification on this.
Do you feel clarified on this, Jeff?
I feel clarified. I could go with one that, it's like the Hallmark dog.
Somebody's got to be skeptical.
The Hallmark dog, like, take the first ballot Hall of Famers off of it.
Yes, thank you.
And you can.
Nick Chubb's not a first ballot Hall of Famer?
Hold on, you got to be an All-American. I don't know if he ever was an All-American. First-team All-American by one of the major services.
That is correct. But you're telling me Nick Chubb isn't a Georgia first-team All-American, a first-team Hall of Famer?
Wow, how big is our team?
He's the number 2 running back all time in terms of rushing yards.
Arguments can be made. Gurley is the number 2 instead of Nick. I would say, and this is one of those that, the warm, chewy center of DGD-ness or whatever.
Okay.
Nobody's ever going to say, I think you said him earlier, but sometimes the first instinct is the best instinct here. And for me, I don't know if there's so many, though, in the last 5 years. We almost seem spoiled. So I almost want to go back deeper into the rungs or whatever. But there's a guy here for me that checks every box. He was a defensive linchpin. I can just simply, I'm sure we've got the video, Jordan Davis leading the band. Jordan Davis is going to make nobody's Rushmore when they talk about the 5 best dogs. It'll usually be Champ Bailey, Herschel Walker, David Pollock, Stetson Bennett, Brock Bowers, some combination on the rubrics of those guys. But nobody ever mentions Jordan Davis, and I think Jordan Davis is a guy, it hits all the notes because he comes in as a 3-star, gets developed, becomes a first-round draft pick, was so much more important to the scheme because of what he did so well by taking on blockers, freed up Nakobe Dean and everybody else, Quay Walker and Nolan Smith, to hunt. I think my answer I feel pretty good about. I can stand 10 toes on it would be Jordan Davis.
Yeah, I think that's a good one, too. Whenever we bring on Cody in a second, that was a conversation that he had with Mike of who can be that next Jordan Davis in terms of being a fan favorite and being so recognizable and loved by the community. So I feel like Jordan Davis is first ballot. Connor?
Again, you're telling me that Jordan Davis isn't like a first ballot all-time Georgia guy?
Defensive tackles, I mean, again, I talk about Rushmore. I talk about first ballot Hall of Famer, college football Hall of Famer.
He'll get it. I believe he was an All-American.
He was, yeah.
So I'm going to go. So if you're allowed to take Jordan Davis, then I'm going to take a guy that completely changed the culture of the Georgia program from the moment he stepped on the field and made an absolute difference. Started, I believe, all but one game in his collegiate career. That's Andrew Thomas. Left tackle, right tackle, did it all for Georgia in his time at Georgia. First year, obviously starts in the national championship game. I think changed the way that we view this program moving forward in terms of what it does and in terms of what it can be on the offensive line. And so all that he meant from buying into Kirby, from a guy that probably wouldn't have gone to Georgia had Kirby Smart not come in. When Kirby comes in, he prioritizes Andrew Thomas. He comes with Sam Pittman, who built so many of those great first Georgia offensive lines. I'm going with Andrew Thomas as a DGD. If you want me to go even further back and not just limit this to the Kirby Smart era, I'll throw out David Andrews there as well.
For someone that was unsure of the criteria, I thought you just explained that out really well. All right, let's go ahead and bring in Cody.
Did I miss that it has to be Kirby Smart era?
No.
Did I miss that?
Does not.
No.
It's all time. Okay.
Yeah.
Andrew Thomas. There's 4. We're talking 4 on the Mount Rushmore of Georgia football player DGDs, and Andrew Thomas is on there?
Do you not value the 2017 national championship appearance and the Rose Bowl and everything that comes with that? Because Andrew Thomas is a big reason that happens.
Put Nick Chubb on there. But Andrew Thomas is not on the Mount Rushmore of DGDs for the University of Georgia. We got Champ Bailey and David Pollock and Herschel Walker has not been brought up yet.
Well,
how are we not? Charlie Trippy hasn't been brought up yet, and you're putting Andrew Thomas on the DGD of Mount Rushmore for the University of Georgia?
Andrew Thomas was drafted higher than all the guys you just listed.
That's not a DGD. It's not NFL draft. No. DGD. You could put Hot Rod over Andrew Thomas. That is, sorry.
Cody doesn't value offensive linemen, I guess.
My voice is still terrible.
But that's okay.
That is insane to me.
You just don't value what Andrew Thomas brought to the program at that point in time, and that's understandable.
Andrew Thomas, he never talked to us. He had no personality. He played drums in the church band. Great. But that is not the guy that is a DGD who comes back to Georgia and speaks to the team and is a leader on the team. Was he even a permanent captain?
Yes.
I mean, come on.
He was, Cody.
He is not up there with Herschel Walker, Buck Bellew. Stetson Bennett hasn't been brought up. He's the quarterback who won 2 national championships.
Stetson Bennett's not a DGD to a lot of people, Cody.
Yeah.
That's a controversial opinion.
Stetson Bennett, because okay, that's fine, but he's still like a higher profile person than Andrew Thomas was.
All right, Cody, give us what you think.
I would say Charlie Trippy. I don't like the recency bias. I think he's a 60-minute man, lived his life in Athens afterwards, coached at the University of Georgia. He is a DGD. Went off to war, got robbed of the Heisman Trophy. So there you go. Sorry, I didn't mean to get so emotional. I didn't think I would.
I don't know. I think you did.
But that just blew my mind.
I think it's also partially the cracked voice.
He didn't do that for effect? He's a professional broadcaster.
Yeah,
he can crack his voice.
He spends a lot of time with Mike, and I think that's rubbing off there.
Okay, well, that is going to be our long finish. Dog Nation, let us know what you think in the comments. After that, I feel like I need a long drink. I'm actually going through dry February right now, and trust me, the first thing that I'm going to be having on March, I am doing dry
shortest
February.
month?
Okay, it wasn't supposed to work out that way, but it just kind of did. But we're going strong. But trust me, on March 1st, the first thing that I'm going to have is a finished long drink. The white can is my absolute go-to. If you haven't had the chance to try one of these, you absolutely need to. It's the one thing that I recommend to all of my friends. And even if you don't know where to get them, it's really easy. You can go to thelongdrink.com and you can type in your zip code or the city that you live in, and it'll tell you where the nearest one is. You can usually find them at any liquor store, but make sure to give them a try. There is a flavor for everyone. I know myself and Jeff are big fans of the the Zero Citrus White can, but the blue is great. If you want something a little bit stronger, go with the black can, or if you're more into the flavored ones, I'd recommend the cranberry or the peach. But make sure to check out thelongdrink.com to find out where you can find the nearest long drink. That way you can finally try one and see what we're talking about. And with that, we will go ahead and wrap up on DawgNation Daily. All right, we do have Gator Hater today. I don't think that we've had the chance to do one all week, but we do have one today. We're getting into big numbers. It's been 1,567 days since Florida has beaten Georgia. I wish I could do it as sarcastic as Brandon does it. He just has that like magic touch on it. So that's our Gator Hater Updater. And now we're going to do our R.S. Andrews cool down. We're going to bring in Cody Chaffins for this. He's going to help us with some of the comments if he is able to do so.
Is he? Is he going to yell at us some more?
If you want to text him to me, that's...
No, I'm looking at him. I'm on Facebook. Kirk Schultz, he said, Cody getting shook up. Cody needs a long drink, says Jacob O'Neill. Good morning to everybody. It's Pete Williams on my side says, you guys should be ashamed of yourselves for picking up on Cody. A lot of folks putting in their DGD, Mount Rushmore, Herschel Walker, Brock Bowers, Champ Bailey. How about a Bennett, Walker, Bailey, Pollock? Cody's been drinking Blackberry Dr. Pepper and a long drink. I don't know, you can mix that. You already got great flavors with the long drink as well. Stet honorable mention. Let's see, Chubb didn't win a natty. Nakobe Dean, some folks saying. Roquan on his, that's another guy we didn't bring up. Terrell Davis, NFL Hall of Famer. But again, Terrell Davis, and I don't know if it's because he transferred in or he kind of had beef with Jim Donnan after the fact. He does stick up for Georgia a lot now nationally, but to me that's part of it too, is like the legacy of it. So guys who you associate with the University of Georgia, David Pollock was everything you wanted with the motor on the field, but then also, you know, you think of Georgia, you think of David Pollock.
And the fact that he still comes back to, like, even when we were at the Rick's dog bowling event, Pollock was there. I think of that video of him chatting up Jalen Walker. So I feel like you could definitely throw Pollock. And he coaches in the community.
Let's make sure, just for accuracy's sake and for historical record, that we include the name Cedric Von Prawn Granger in this conversation as well, amongst those all-time great Georgia dogs. There's a bunch. I think, you know, I always kind of looked at that question is Chris Smith would be a great example of that. And you keep wanting to go back further and further, and you want to find those guys that still rep Georgia. We still, as much as, this is what it is, the last 5 years has been so much gold for the University of Georgia. You forget folks like Terry Hogue, who was a national everything award finalist. He was the top 10 for Heisman Trophy as a safety. He's a good guy, and of course, the great, incomparable Nolan Smith right now is the guy you got to think of. It's so funny because if you asked 1,000 dog fans in Sanford to name DGDs, the ones that would populate from the championship teams would always be Bowers and Stetson, if I'm correct. Yeah. Because everybody would, most popular, most polarizing at least. And then there are guys like Jordan, Nakobe, Trayvon, like all those guys just really don't get the love because there's so many megawatt stars in there.
Was it you that said you wouldn't be surprised if Nolan, after he retires, ends up becoming a coach and finds his way back to Georgia? Was that you?
I think that was maybe Mike that had brought that up. But Nolan is a guy who, look, you know, he's going to make a ton of money in the NFL doing what he does, and if he wants to grind and be a head coach, I think he's absolutely got the personality and charisma to do so.
And he learned from a good one, so.
Well, while Cody's still cooling down here, we had a lot of material that we could have sorted through for this, especially for our topics. I want one-word answers from both of you guys on this subject, these subjects, okay? We'll just call it chill. One-word answers. Kaylee, go first. Does the Gator Hater countdown go over 2,000?
Yes.
Connor?
Yes.
Does it go over 3,000?
No.
No, I think Florida's going to get a win at some point.
Just basically, like on sheer numbers, we were talking about this at breakfast this morning. Sorry, guys. Between Florida and Georgia Tech, the way that the rivalries have been so skewed, just in the way that numbers and statistics works, somebody has to get one on Georgia at some point.
The math is going to math.
The math has to math.
Having said that, Georgia Tech hasn't beaten Georgia in Bobby Dodd Stadium, where they play their home games, since 1999.
Well, they're not playing in Bobby Dodd this year.
Yeah. Second one. This is a better one. This is a juicy one. This could be sponsored by Juicy Fruit. as things start falling off out of every pocket here. Georgia enters 2025 with SEC record tying 31 straight home wins.
No.
Does it go all the way to the end of the season?
No.
Does Georgia lose at home?
Yeah, they lose at home.
Mm-hmm.
What's the first game they lose at home? We can do snake order. Connor, you can go back this way.
I think that Ole Miss game comes at a really interesting time in the season.
Wow, so they get Alabama and Texas, but you like the Ole Miss game.
That Ole Miss game is the week after Auburn, and everyone's going to be picking that Auburn game as a potential, can't lose that game. It's going to be a tough environment. It's going to mean the world to Auburn. You come back, look, I know they're losing Jackson Dart, and yes, they're losing a lot off their defensive line. Austin Simmons, in the one drive he played against Georgia, looked really, really good. And they bring back a lot of the wide receivers that they had available to them that day. And like Lane Kiffin, say what you want about the transfer portal, and if you want, that's how you want to build your team. He's clearly figured something out into getting Ole Miss to a certain level in that regard. And look, I know the last time they came to Georgia, Georgia blew the doors off of them. With where that game falls on the schedule, I'm very interested in sort of seeing how Georgia is able to get up for it.
Georgia conquers the Dragon against Alabama. They don't lose that game. It's either going to be Texas or Ole Miss.
It's a given that they will set the new SEC record, right? Because they got Marshall first.
It's if they beat Marshall, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. You feel good about all those?
Yeah.
Like all those?
We do accountability checks, so we will bring this up at some point.
Keeping receipts, right?
We do. Sometimes it gets ugly.
And hey, look, if Georgia goes unbeaten at home again, we're going to bring up this clip at the end of the season.
They will, listen,
they're already cutting it right now, just in case.
I'm going to tell you this. Georgia gets through this year, I think it would go to 38. They beat Texas, and I think that's the season finale at home is against
Charlotte.
Texas. Oh, yeah. I'm sorry.
How could he forget?
How could I forget Charlotte? Apologies for the 3 Charlotte people that are watching this program right now. But I don't know if they'll, I was digging this up because I was thinking it was pretty cool. One of my potentials was going to be the home win streak topic. And you realize Kirby lost 3 games. You might know this. Kirby lost 3 games his first season at Georgia at home. And then starting with 2017, they're 47-1 since that point. Georgia has lost 1 game at home since 2017. I don't know if people understand that.
I know what it is.
That is mind-boggling. When Kirby Smart says it's tough to win on the road in the SEC at every other SEC venue, he probably should say, well, it's impossible to win here because I haven't lost one since South Carolina and Will Muschamp, 20-17.
So what do you think? Do you think that with their big 3 games at home, they go 3 for 3?
I think the win streak stays intact. I think the way Georgia loses this year is on the road, hostile venue. Now listen, here's another breach prediction here. I think Georgia's freshmen are really going to hit this year. At the point where I'm a guy that tries to do the freshman report when warranted when there's a lot of freshmen. Last year it was the same 2 or 3 the whole game. I think think about this, folks. Cortez Smith is 17. Ethan Barbour is 17. C.J. Wiley is 17. There are a lot of guys. Somebody from that list, like Elijah Griffin, Isaiah Gibson, Ethan Barbour, guys, that guy's killing it in winter workouts. I had a little birdie tell me that Ethan went 21.5 on off-season workouts on the GPS.
You said something similar about Barbour.
The way we talked about Lawson Lucky 2 years ago when he was a freshman and the way he came in right away and made an impact, now we didn't ultimately see it because he had an injury, would not surprise me in the slightest if Ethan Barbour finds a way to do something similar.
Barbour won't have the athleticism that Bowers has, but that insane, ruthless competitor type gene in his head, I think Barbour's got that microchip in his head. And some of those freshmen, like Gibson, Taylor, they're going to hit big. We're going to be talking about one of Georgia's best 5 players next season is going to be one of these true freshmen.
And they're going to have to. This past season, granted, they bring in the #1 recruiting class in the country. 21 of the 28 guys on that team end up redshirting and not playing that first season. And really, the only guys that I think you could say carved out roles of significance would have been Nate Frazier, KJ Bolden, and Chris Cole. And even Cole was a very hyper-specific role on third down defenses that came apart in large part because of an injury to Smile London. They're going to need a lot more from this freshman team because I think in going through it, I think 56 out of the projected 85 scholarship guys are guys that are in either their first or second year in this program. It's just a very young program entering 2025.
I meant to ask you, because you're usually in the Friday spot here on DawgNation Daily. You always give some sort of recruiting update. Did you have any Sentell's intel that you would typically give on today's show?
I mean, it's just crazy how, like we talked about on Hedges this week, it's crazy how the official visits are all being set up for these kids in February. Kaylee, that's uncommon. We don't see that happening because it's really like all they got to do. Like, let's take these visits and let's go on and on and on. But this is a different cycle where Georgia. We talked about this, and we're going to try to be as honest and fair to what we see in the landscape. This is a very, I don't know, we've never said it on the DawgNation Daily airtime, but this is a very down year for the state of Georgia. I mean, like kind of that bad in terms of. Georgia's always been, the state of Georgia's been always so good, but the reason why I'm only half kidding when I kind of covered my nose there was because the offensive and defensive linemen, the people that make this program so unique, they're just not there. They're just not. And like we have this stat, we dug up this stat of the top 200 players in the country. I don't know if Connor's heard this, but of the top 200 players in the country, only 4 of those are offensive and defensive linemen from the state of Georgia.
3 are D-line, 1 is offensive line.
Yeah, and then 2 of the D linemen are like edge guys that aren't really defensive linemen. So, and those guys, and the one offensive lineman is a guy that's a converted tight end. And Georgia's not even in the running for him because they're looking elsewhere. But like, the big thing with recruiting now is everybody wonders like, hey, how much is it going to cost? And it's going to cost probably a little bit more because Georgia's going to go outside the borders a little bit.
And to that point, Jeff, we talked earlier about how there isn't an obvious sort of first-round pick going into next year. I think that's a direct indictment of Georgia's 2023 recruiting class, where similarly it was a down year in the state of Georgia in terms of just overall talent. I think there were a total of like 6 top 200 prospects overall, not just limited to either offensive or defensive lines. 12 of the 26 players they signed in that 2023 class will not be with the program in a playing capacity next year already. And I think that's a big reason why this team is so young going into 2025 and why there's not that obvious talent there. So Georgia this past year, I think they signed 21 players from the state of Georgia was the final tally there. With recruiting now, it's going to ebb and flow, and I think you see with Georgia in the years that they can lean on in-state recruiting like they did this past cycle, they're absolutely going to do that because it becomes very pricey, as you point out, Jeff, to do that from an out-of-state perspective. Here's
a couple of answers to the test. Cheating a little bit here. Remember when we collected all those comments from Georgia's coaches at the Sugar Bowl, the assistants? I had a lot of fun, like reading between the lines on a lot of this stuff. And one of the things that you heard from a lot of the coaches is they talked about, we got to find the right guy. You and I were talking about group dynamics.
Group compatibility.
There were some. I don't think the word cancerous would ever apply to a Kirby Smart team, but there were some guys that just didn't get along with the other guys, and those are the guys that leave. And I think, talented as you are, one of the things, the key phrases you've heard from Georgia's recruiters on the trail is we want to find a guy that fits in with the other guys we have. Like, it's not the most talented 5. It's the best 5. So that's a lot of stuff with recruiting right now. Georgia's offering everybody in the world, but they really want to find out, like, how, and I'm going to use James Coley's words, how will they be like in the foxhole with everybody else that's currently in the foxhole?
Yeah, well, at the end of the day, they have to play for each other, want to play for each other. I think that's maybe an issue that there was on the team last year, certain people not wanting to play for somebody else.
Another insidery thing, you asked for a good recruiting thing. I don't know if you noticed this. I noticed these things. Oregon had a quarterback commitment in the 2026 class. The buzz on him staying with Oregon and of leaving Oregon has grown. All the predictions now have him going to flip to SC, Southern California. The Trojans, and what does this do, Kaylee? If you put 1 + 1 = 2, Oregon doesn't have a quarterback.
They're going to go all in on Jared Curtis.
There you go. There you go. So Oregon and Georgia, they're going to be playing Family Feud a lot.
Well, that's the problem, too, now with you have to go out of the state for your 2026 cycle, and now all of a sudden you don't have that competitive advantage of you get to play close to home. So now you're going to be competing with so many other, money grabbers like Texas and Oregon and I wouldn't throw USC in there anymore, but you don't have that advantage anymore if you get to play somewhere that's near your family.
Hey Jeff, what color is Kaylee's sweater? Is that Oregon green?
It is. She's a plant.
No, this is not. This is darker than Oregon green.
She's gonna be dropping an O at the end of this. Show.
I'd do it for a check.
Big Dan Lanning fan.
Here's a
for that Phil Knight money, maybe.
cool. Yeah, Kaylee would be sponsored by Nike. Every day.
I got my Nike shoes on.
The best quarterback in the country, I think, the quarterback prospect in the country, I don't even think is the guy going to Tennessee or the guy going to wherever, Jared Curtis, wherever he will land. I think he's currently going to Houston.
That's what I've heard.
Casey and Henderson, he's a guy that I remember seeing him at the Future 50 guys last summer. And you asked him what he does, and he's like, man, I'm a do everything guy. I'm an athlete. Some people have me at tight end. Some people have me at quarterback. Some people have me at wide receiver. I kind of do it all. Well, he does it all in the quarterback position, and he shined bright at the Navy All-American game. Got to make sure that all corporate logos worked right there. But going to Houston, and Houston's got some pockets in that area, oil money, a little bit of its own. And he sounds like he's going to stick with Houston, even though like the Alabamas and Georgias and all the other schools in the country are coming. Very interesting. Houston, folks. Mm-hmm. Houston, we have a quarterback.
It sounds like, because somebody else said that Texas Tech was kind of on their way up too. And I watched in light of SMU having their big run this last year, I watched the Pony Excess doc, and that's kind of how it was at that time, that all the Texas schools, they were tired of hearing their coworkers brag about how good their teams were. So all those teams just kind of went all in on their programs. And of course now it's legal. So it reminds me of that. Cody, do you have anything back there? Anything you've been sitting on?
Oh, comments.
What are you doing?
No, that's what everybody's asking. What about our comments? It was interesting to hear some folks saying, kind of from 2 questions ago, about Auburn and how that's the game they do not want to lose. It was interesting to see, now I can't find who did the comment, but talking about the tight end room, do you feel like, Jeff, after spring practice, with the way that Barbour's coming on, with the way Elias Williams is going to come on, do we see some attrition there? Is somebody leaving? Not necessarily the new guys, but is it, Connor brought up Jaden Riddell on DawgNation at Large yesterday. Is he a guy who sees the writing on the wall after spring practice?
No, I think Jaden Riddell is part of the exclamation points there at tight end. Like I said, here's a take. I feel like I'm taking take time. Connor's around here. We ought to throw takes around. I think Georgia, the combination of Georgia's tight ends this year will give you Brock Bowers type production. Jaden Riddell is another guy who had a Brock Bowers type number. I believe he hit 22.1 in a workout, everything else like that. Here's a very, recruit nerd type thing to say right here. Georgia's number for the recruiting room is where it should be because they lost Jurasik. Jurasik replaced Sperling. Sperling was the medical redshirt. Jurasik replaced Sperling, so they needed to reload with a couple of tight ends. So I think the number is where it should be with tight ends. And I think the one thing about Riddell, he just needed to learn how to block. He never blocked before, and blocking at an SEC level. Talked to Todd Hartley during that Sugar Bowl media scrum, and he said, kid's getting it. He's coming on. You got Lawson, you got Delp, you got the 2 new kids. I think Elias Williams is actually going to shift out a lot to receiver. So he's going to do a lot of the things that maybe Noah Thomas is doing so they can show Caden Prothrow as well. So the tight end position, I think, is quite ample resources at the University of Georgia. Probably got more tight ends. Todd Hartley's got more tight ends than Kaylee's got Nike shoes in her closet.
I doubt that. Let's not get too crazy here. All right, Cody, keep them coming.
Yeah, Jonathan Aaron, Jeff is asking you maybe for some recruiting advice for somebody he's got. When do you start seeing these guys at camps? When do they start making their names? What age do they need to be in there? What camps do they need to be at camps to get that star to rise?
Yeah, the best thing to do is to go be seen, especially go to the Georgia team camps. Like if your heart's set on being a Georgia Bulldog, pay the money, go to the Kirby Smart camp, and if you stand out, you pop, you shine, they'll move you up, and they'll tell you to come back to another camp. The biggest thing to do is just to be seen. Like we saw a young man at Parkview dominate, was the defensive back MVP at the Under Armour Atlanta camp with a lot of other luminaries there, and he was a 2027 with not a lot of offers yet. And sometimes it's kind of funny how the tape takes a long time to get to people. Like I made a comment on social media this week that Kamari Brooks just got an offer from Texas. And I was like, how in the world does Texas not offer Kamari Brooks? I think he's one of the best 50 players in the country. And somebody, pretty funny line they had on social media, Connor, they were like, hey, they're just doing what Texas does. They're coming in very late, seeing what the market looks like, and then dropping checks.
It's Justice Terry and how that recruitment all unfolded, I think, is going to have Georgia fans having a long memory when it comes to Texas and the way they go about recruiting.
Oh, most definitely.
But go to camps, be seen, compete. The best way you get known is somebody that these coaches value, that their opinion they value. Say, hey, you got to see that guy. You got to see that guy, and that's how it happens. Word travels.
All right, we're going to take just a few more and then probably give it about 5 minutes. Then we'll go ahead and start wrapping up. Cody?
Yeah, so William Camacho is he's pointing out that you're wearing the color of the duck as well. And Kirk says,
it is too dark for that. Let me just say that.
Says Oregon picked up Bear Alexander. I wish them luck.
Also got a green amulet pendant going on.
Okay,
today.
that's my birthstone, though.
A lot of green.
Your favorite color is green, too. I don't wear it.
I don't wear it on DawgNation Daily.
But if I wore Georgia colors, you would say something about that, too. It's a lose-lose situation here. All right, looks like...
Cody's cooled down. The segment's working. Cody went from red. Cody
exactly what it needed to be, right? You get all fired up in the show, and I apologize for going off.
We'll make you two hug it out later.
It was
no
probably
worries.
too much, especially with the way my voice is. But sorry about all that.
I think it's his voice that added to the anger because he couldn't talk in just like a normal tone, and so that I think made it seem harsher than he was actually going for.
Philip Jordan Wells says we got to go into 13 personnel, get all those tight ends on the field. Agree with that. We some folks reaching out saying they appreciate us doing these over the pre-recorded shows at the end. So Randy Hall wants to know, is Tyler Atkinson a lock for the Dogs?
Never such thing as a lock. But
no.
We got to use these key phrases.
We found that out in Manchester, Georgia this year.
Hold on 1 second. Which one of these? This is pretty funny. You guys follow enough recruiting coverage. Which one of these terms feels like code words for a lock? It's subtly the way the industry says. Let's go. One of them, in a good spot. You like that? Georgia is in a good spot.
No.
Or is it feel good about where the Dogs stand right now with Tyler Atkinson?
I think that feels pretty strong.
Yeah.
As strong as you're going to get.
One thing about that, people don't want to know the output, right? But a lot of times, what we do, a lot of people that cover recruiting very well for this program, but also across the country, is that all we can really do is give information that's like a Polaroid picture, and we take a snapshot in time, and that's where things are. But then, dynamics change. X happens, Y happens, Z happens, which makes that Polaroid picture of 6 days ago rather fleeting. But I just think with Tyler, it's the relationship there, and Tyler can only look at Georgia and say, listen, it's close to home. Glenn Schumann has coached 3 Butkus winners in the last 6 years. Nobody else comes close. They play great defense. There'll be players around me. I'll be on a big stage. His market value, I would say, to sound like an analytical marketing person or an agent for a player, I think his market value is probably where he's built his name so far, and his brand would be the state of Georgia. I think those are things that come into play where Tyler Atkinson, and I know I've been told by a lot of people around it that somebody's not going to come in and offer him $500,000 more than anyone else, and that will win the recruit.
So do you feel like he's in a good spot, or do you have a good feeling about where things are at?
I was waiting for that to come. I got to invent a new one. I was like, what would be the best one, the strongest one? It was go ahead and buy your 16 Atkinson jersey at the bookstore. Yeah. That would be the strongest thing we could possibly.
Yeah, it would contribute to the NIL fund. Yeah.
Well, 16 jerseys out there. And by the way, we did not bring up Kirby Smart as a DGD. He played. He got a lot of interceptions as a player, and obviously what he's done for the program. You could argue he belongs up there. Senior Dog asking a question that I actually have too. We still don't have a date for when spring practice officially starts, or even pro day yet, right? You guys are more locked in, Connor, obviously, than I am.
It's not official yet. I believe March 11th is probably the first day they're going to do the big media availability, and my understanding is that if we're going based off tradition, March 12th is usually when Georgia's pro day would fall on that Wednesday there. Now, that is also the first day of the NFL league year, but they've been consistent with that in that regard. I'd point out as well, and this maybe leads us into another jumping off point, Georgia has not officially announced a G-Day date yet, and while I still believe they're going to have one, the longer they go without announcing it, the more skeptical I get. It just sort of grows, with no confirmation that grows. You see yesterday Texas come out and announce that they're not going to have a spring game this year. USC has recently announced this. Now, there's part of me from a player standpoint, I never like spring practice, But at the same point in time, I think for the common Georgia fan, it's a chance for them to get to Sanford Stadium in a time where they may not necessarily be able to do that over the course of the season. Kirby Smart, I think, finds himself in an interesting position with what he wants to do for spring games, because you think back to his first one, 93K day, how important that was to the program. I'm very interested in seeing what Georgia ultimately elects to do with spring games, not just in 2025, as we've seen some schools go ahead and knock those off, but moving forward as well. How much does he follow sort of the old way that things had been done in a sport that, while I love the NFL, I very much don't want college football to take on more NFL-like qualities, and doing away with spring games, I think, represents that.
I wonder, Connor, everybody's about programming these days. I wonder if it eventually evolves into like a spring carnival where, like, listen, I hear so many all-time dog fans tell me, this is a very popular question. When you're on a Dog Nation cruise or you're like out and about at a remote, they'll ask me this question and say, will there ever be a chance that Georgia has something like a picture day again, where people won't remember this now. It used to be at the Classic City under the Rick era, Classic Center under the Rick era, but it used to be they got on a practice field and everybody had like a table, and you could take pictures and get autographs from the players. And it took like 2 or 3 hours. I remember I was a wee lad, and I was on Herschel Walker's knee at a picture day and everything else like that. But you'd be surprised how many fans just cherish the chance. It's not just to see him play in red and black jerseys, and that's the red team, and that's the black team, and that's Beanie Weenies. I think the people are starving for like the personal interaction that they'd get with the team. If it's just simply, hey, can I get a picture? And you have a quarterback station, you have a running back station. Maybe the spring carnival looks like something like the dog Olympics, where it's like who bench presses the most, who has the fastest 40, who can throw the football the farthest, or the accuracy challenge. One other thing, and this is a no contest. Nobody can say squat about this DGD nominee, the great Larry Munson.
Ooh.
Connor looks like he has something to say.
Oh, well, that's a different time.
Look, I realize this, like, Larry Munson obviously means a ton to the University of Georgia. An icon, an institution. I know I am skating on thin ice here.
You do not want this to be in the social clip for the show.
My thing with Larry Munson, because I have friends that say this, you know, in a time when things are going so well for Georgia, the Larry Munson in them, you know, and it speaks to the impact that he had on people here, they still expect things to come undone at the worst time, or things to not go and break Georgia's way. I think we need to maybe get past that thought that something terrible is going to happen, given what we've seen at Georgia. They've won 31 consecutive games in Sanford Stadium. They've won 2 national championships in recent memory. They won an SEC championship. Larry Munson, his calls, hobnail boot, iconic, the Kevin Butler made field goal. Some of the doom and gloom that I think seeps in from his influence on Georgia fans growing up listening to him, I think we can maybe start to move past that as Georgia moves into a new era.
What's the age point where, like, if you're at a tailgate and someone says, who's Larry Munson, do you automatically revoke their fan card? Is it 25?
There are definitely kids under the age of 25 that don't understand the impact of Larry Munson. I think they hear the calls, but I don't think it resonates with them in the same way. Like, I think people my age, they know, they understand Larry Munson, they get it, they understand the influence that he had. I don't know that people a whole lot younger than me necessarily do.
Yeah, to y'all's point, I know because I've been around it and grew up around it and hear y'all talk about him, but I have a sister who's 22, and if I asked her who Larry Munson was, I guarantee you she wouldn't know.
So this is a story, and I did not show my age on this one, but we were in a apparel, kind of a luxury apparel store, and they had T-shirts, you know, the Affinity Georgia T-shirts, right? Mm-hmm. And there was one of Munson on the back of a white T-shirt, and there were some youngsters. They looked like 20-ish or whatever. They were, oh, who's that guy? And they're like, oh, he was a great coach. I think he won a national championship with Georgia. And I was like, we got to help the young people. We got to help the young people.
Mm-hmm. My sister, Double Dog, you know, she's 26. I'll ask her if she knows who Larry, like if she knows and understands who Larry, because like, sure, it's one thing to know Larry Munson, you know, you hear his calls at the beginning of the Georgia games, glory, glory to old Georgia. My voice isn't razzly enough to do it.
We need Cody to do it.
Cody might have the perfect voice to do it right now.
Today.
Glory, glory to old Georgia.
Well, that's as well as you're gonna get it.
Good one.
I don't think like they understand the significance of Larry. And like it's hard, like if you don't know about it and you weren't around for it, I feel like it's one of those things too that is just hard to sort of explain. Like
Executive producer Jay chiming in here, as somebody who was proud to work on that broadcast for a decade. Do you know the last great Larry Munson call was probably Matt Stafford to Muhammad Massaquoi, right? Remember what year that was?
That was 2007.
18 years ago.
It was Nick Saban's first year.
So it's been, unfortunately now, 18 years since Larry Munson really nailed one, and his final season was more than a decade ago. So it's just time passes on. But all credit to Scott Howard, who is the man.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Touchdown, Massaquoi.
Okay. All right.
But I do see Connor's point too, because look at the clock saying no.
You know, this is the off.
There's so much pessimism, and I think it probably did rub off on me.
Yeah.
And it's certainly there because of old lady luck just not on our side tonight. I gave up. You did too.
And that pessimism, I think it makes his great calls shine through, because he's just like, I was so anticipating a loss that, I'm elated that there's going to be some property destroyed on Jacksonville tonight. I think that's where Larry's pessimism, which is a calling card of his, I think helped transcend him as a broadcaster.
Now listen, this is the slow season, or the slower season for Georgia football, especially with like all these programs we still love to put on every day, right? Wouldn't it be a great show, like the top 10 Munson calls? Not a lot of older seasoned Georgia veteran fans will know, but like to just share the knowledge with the masses about, these are the 5 greatest Larry Munson calls of all time, like for your sister or somebody like that, people that don't know what's up about Larry. Can you imagine if he'd have lived through this era? And how many cigars? He always had a cigar after every broadcast.
It's going to be my next question. Look, AI is becoming a thing. I despise it. Don't trust robots. I've seen the Terminator movies. I know how this all ends. And I'm sure sometime soon we're going to get like a Larry Munson AI that can like do calls based on what transpires on the field. Is there a play from the Kirby Smart era that you would have liked to have seen?
It's got to be 33-18.
Can I break in?
Yeah.
Interesting. Keely's pick 6.
I tried this at home. I sent ChatGPT. I said, here are a bunch of famous Larry Munson calls. Here's what happened at the end of the Keely Ringo pick 6. Write out what Larry would have said for this. And then there is AI out there that you send in a couple clips of his voice, it'll try and mock that. It was not close enough. But it seems like something, too, if you paid a little bit more, it was all free AI, that you could try and do. But I have tried that before because I do think Keely's was so iconic. And one of the really cool things, I got to cover that game afterwards. I got to sit on the field with Lauren Smith. I said, Lauren, what would Larry think about all this? It was one of the coolest moments of my life.
So would it have been the Oklahoma, the Miracle?
That one comes to mind. I think the one that I'd be most interested in is call, because I think we talk about Larry's state of view of things. That Ohio State game, with the way that was going, and the way people, I think that's the one where, Keely's is obviously its own separate thing, but the swings of emotion, the fact that it happened right at midnight, that I'm sure he would have picked up and nailed, I think that would have been the one to me, to hear that call and to go from, look, in the press box, I was thinking that kick was going to be made and that was going to be the end of Georgia's run, to they're going to a national championship game and they're playing TCU, who they obviously go on to beat.
If the good Lord had graced us with extending Munson into the Kirby era, I don't know if he'd have made it past second and 27.
Oh, man.
Can you imagine? The broadcast would have just crickets, right? It'd have been can you imagine, Cody, this might be possible. AI of, instead of OU Herschel Walker, OU Brock Bowers, run, Brock, run. Can you imagine him stampeding up the sideline against UAB? And he's like, oh my gosh, I tied in, running like a freight train.
My God, a freshman.
Yeah. I think that would be, some of those moments, that's a good thought bubble topic, but just all of it. You're like, oh, they're eating chicken wings on the sidelines against TCU here in this newfangled stadium. Lauren, can you get me a chicken wing?
All right, guys, we got to wrap it up here. Any final thoughts from you, Jeff?
2025 is going to be a good one.
Connor?
I still don't know what qualifies someone to make the DGD Mount Rushmore.
You know what? It was risky. And even though in that moment it may have gotten a little heated, I think we're all better friends because of it. And so I mean, that's what makes it such a good argument, is everybody has a different interpretation. All right, this is our R.S. Andrews cool down. Y'all make sure to go check out R.S. Andrews. Having issues with your water heater, they can come fix it in just one day. That's why R.S. stands for Rapid Service. With it being cold outside, make sure to leave your pipes running. But if you forget, R.S. Andrews can help with whatever you need. So make sure to check them out at rsandrews.com. I know you guys are probably ready to. Jeff?
Please finish. Please finish your read.
Oh, you had your hand raised.
I do. I just thought of a story.
Okay.
So we're going to.
That's fine.
I just thought of a story. It's off the rails. Throw it away. But so like heating and air, right? And then the Daytona Beach commercial got me as well, right?
Yeah.
I remember sitting, it's in Geneva, Illinois. It's 27 degrees, and I'm talking to Talon Taylor and his mother about, well, we won't have any of these days in Georgia anymore. It's like, and nothing has happened since Talon Taylor came to Georgia. It's been like 18, 20, 20, 24, 20, 25. Those people must think that Chicago temps and Athens temps are the exact same.
Yeah, he must have brought it with him. Do you have anything else?
That's just an oddity, a story I thought people would like to know.
Are you good?
I'm good.
Connor?
Can I get anything?
Good.
I'm good
Cody?
to go.
Jay Black? Okay. All right. Let's do it. Thank y'all for joining us. You'll get Brandon back next week, but thanks for hanging out with us all this past week on DawgNation Daily. You guys have a good weekend.